All right, I want to do some 12 lead review for you guys. So basically reading 12 leads. Now I do want to tell you that you're not going to be quizzed on this right away. Really your first 12 lead quiz is going to be understanding the 12 lead and which leads correspond with which wall of the heart, and also which leads correspond with which artery could be blocked. So we're going to kind of review all this when we're kind of determining 12 leads. But you won't actually have to label any 12 leads and diagnose them. So this first one we're looking at, and what I like to do when I first start reading these 12 leads is I kind of draw that handout I gave you, that chart, over the 12 lead. And when I first started reading 12 leads, I would just draw right on the 12 lead. This kind of helped me identify 12 leads. So it kind of breaks apart the different sections in each section that I'm looking at. So the first thing we want to look at is rate. So our rate, remember these are 10-second strips, so it's a little different than our ECGs, which we typically look at in 6-second strips. But we're going to count across. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 complexes across, and it is kind of hard because the sections where it does break our complexes may look a little weird. So 13 to 10-second strips, I'd have to multiply it by 6, and that gives me a rate of 78 beats per minute. Next thing I want to do is I want to go through and I want to check out which leads are affected. So just going through and looking at each lead. So in this first one, I have lead 1 here. I do have some slight elevation in this lead, and it's kind of hard to see unless you look really, really close, but my isoelectric line is going to run along here, so there is some slight elevation there. And this one is not as pronounced, but we're going to look at some examples where it's a lot easier to tell. But I do have elevation in lead 1. I don't in lead 2. Lead 3, I actually have maybe some slight depression. We don't use AVR in diagnostics because it doesn't correspond with a certain wall. What we do want to see in AVR is that we want to see that our P waves are inverted, which just kind of indicates that we have correct lead placement. When I look at AVL, I definitely have some elevation there. There's my J point up there. There's my isoelectric line. Looking at AVF, I don't have any ST elevation. In V1, I actually have a little bit of depression maybe. V2, it's kind of right on the isoelectric line and then it goes up. Same with V3. V4 looks completely normal. V5, there might be some questionable elevation there. It'd probably only be one line. It's not enough for me to really say, yes, I'm going to count it though. I could always put a question mark there and come back to it and see if it goes with any of my contiguous leads. And then V6 looks pretty normal. So now that we've figured out where our elevation is, I need to go through, I'm going to mark them down here. So I got 1 in AVL. I want to go through and I want to figure out which wall corresponds with each lead. So my lead 1 is going to be lateral. And this is where you can pull out that handout and look at that 12 lead handout. My lead 2 is going to be inferior. Lead 3 is inferior along with AVF. My inferior is that bottom left-hand corner. It's my inferior wall of my heart. AVL goes with lateral. My 1 and 2 shows my septal wall. My 3 and 4 show anterior wall. And 5 and 6, lateral. So by drawing this chart over your 12 leads over and over again, it'll also help you memorize these leads, which leads go with which wall of the heart. There's some kind of ways to remember it. One that I like is I use the term LISA, L-I-S-A, and that just shows me the order and that the leads will appear. So the first one to appear when I'm going from left, down to the right. So down my left over to down my right. So the first one that appears is lateral, so that's where I get the L from, and then inferior, The next one that appears is septal, and then it last to appear is anterior. But you still need to know which leads go with which. I've seen some people do some other things to help them remember. I've seen people draw an L across. They'll show lateral. They'll make an I here for inferior, and then you have your S and your A. I don't like that as much. I think it just looks kind of weird, but if that works for you, it's something to definitely use. Whatever's going to work for you to help you remember. For me, it was just a lot of repetition. So whenever you are doing these, I just suggest writing it out. But I want to know, so I got my leads elevated as 1 in AVL. Those correspond with my lateral wall. So I can go ahead and write walls affected. It's going to be my lateral. Next, I want to look at the arteries affected. So my lateral, when looking at my handout, I see that it corresponds with my circumflex, my left circumflex. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in with all the laterals. And my inferior corresponds with my right coronary artery. Septal is my LAD, along with my anterior. And to remember these arteries, we can really just think about the anatomy of the heart. I know the lateral side, that left circumflex curls around that lateral side, so it would make sense that that artery supplies that area of the heart. So coronary arteries affected, since this is my lateral wall, it's going to be our left circumflex. So I have ST elevation indicating a STEMI in the lateral wall. So the way I would write this out if I were to determine this rhythm is first I would look at my underlying rhythm. So I'm going to look at lead 2. I have a nice P wave, a normal P or interval that goes with my QRS complex, and a normal T wave. So this is a sinus rhythm. We've already figured out rate at 78 beats per minute. And this is where we can just now put our wall affected and STEMI. So you can just write lateral STEMI, you can write lateral wall ST elevation, however you want to put it. I just put the wall and then STEMI just to indicate that there's a STEMI going on and this is where it's at, and I can tell by looking at my 12 lead. All right, let's look at the next one. It has a little bit more defined ST elevation, so it's going to make it a little bit easier to determine. So first, let's draw my chart over my 12 lead. So now I can look at each lead kind of individually and get a little bit better of a picture. So now that I have all my sectioned off, I can go through and start looking to see which leads have elevation. So looking at lead 1 right here, definitely don't have any elevation, actually maybe even some depression, which is normal. If I have elevation somewhere, I'm going to have depression somewhere else. We call those reciprocal changes. Lead 2, I definitely have some elevation here. Here's my J point, way above that isoelectric line. Lead 3, same thing. Definitely have some elevation here. AVR we don't look at for diagnosis. In AVL, looks like I have depression, so I'm going to put an X through. I'm only circling the ones that have elevation. AVF, definitely have some elevation going on there. Looks almost exactly like lead 3. V1 up here looks pretty normal, maybe some depression. Same thing with V2. V3 actually looks completely normal. V4 got some depression maybe. V5 looks completely normal. And V6, it looks like we may have some beginnings of some ST elevation, but my J point's pretty close to the isoelectric line. It just kind of curves up that slant, definitely making it look like there could be a little bit of elevation. So going on, we've decided that, we forgot to do our rate. We'll do that next. Our leads elevated are going to be 2, 3, and AVF. Let's go ahead and do our rate real quick. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times 6 gives me 60 beats per minute. All right, and remember now we have to figure out which walls of the heart are affected. So I'm going to switch colors here, and we're going to go ahead and write all those out. Lead 1, AVL, and 5 and 6, those are all my lateral walls, so I'm just going to put an L this time. 2, 3, AVF, those are my inferior walls. V1 and V2 are septal, and then V3 and V4 are anterior. So my walls affected on this one, I have 2, 3, and AVF, that's going to be my inferior wall. So now let's go through and decide what artery is affected. So I know with my lateral wall, it's the left circumflex that feeds that lateral wall of the heart. And this repetition just really helps you in memorizing this chart. So that's why I'm kind of going through this each time. With my inferior, it's my right coronary artery. And with my septal and anterior, it's my left anterior descending, my big one, my LAD. So for this one, since it's the inferior walls, my coronary arteries affected are going to be the right coronary artery. Now if I wanted to, for some reason my A is following me. If I want to then label this rhythm, we need to figure out what our underlying rhythm is. Now it's really kind of hard to see in lead 2 because I have some artifact there. So it is okay, like if I look up at lead 1, I can see my P wave really well. So it is okay to look at a different lead if you're having trouble seeing it in a certain lead. So I do have a P wave, I got a narrow QRS and a T wave. So it is sinus rhythm at 60 beats per minute with inferior STEMI. Or you can write inferior wall ST elevation. Just note that it is a STEMI and it's in, or we do have ST elevation and it's in the inferior wall. Great, let's go ahead and move on down to the next one. So I'm going to start off the same way. I'm going to draw my chart, kind of separate out my sections. Makes it a little bit easier to kind of look at each lead individually. All right, so now I'm looking for which leads have elevation. So lead 1 looks pretty normal, no elevation. Lead 2, no elevation, looks pretty normal. Lead 3, I have inverted T waves right there, but no elevation. We don't use AVR for diagnostics. Lateral, there's my J point, no elevation. AVF kind of looks very similar to lead 3, got some inverted T waves. V1 definitely have some elevation there, right? Some huge elevation, some tombstones. Definitely higher elevation in V2. Got elevation in V3. Let's take a look at V4. Here's my J point. And there's my isoelectric line, so it looks pretty normal. Lead 5 looks pretty normal. And lead 6 looks pretty normal. All right. Oh, and again, I forgot to do my rate. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 15 times 6, that's going to equal out 90. So I have 90 beats per minute for my rate. My leads elevated, we already decided, I don't know why that's moving. Leads elevated, we have V1, V2, and V3. So now let's go ahead and label our walls. I have my lateral wall in 1 AVL, V5 and V6. I have my inferior wall in the bottom left-hand corner. V1 and V2 are my septal walls. V3 and V4 are my anterior walls. So let's look at walls affected, and remember back to the lecture, there has to be at least 2 contiguous leads. So that's about to play in this one right here. So V1 and V2, these are contiguous with each other and they both show septal wall. So I do know that the septal wall is affected. Now V3 goes with V4. So since I don't have elevation in V4 and I only have it in V3, I'm not going to label this anterior. because for it to be a true anterior wall MI, I would see it in both V3 and V4. Now, that being said, do I think that an infarct is spreading to the anterior wall? Well, absolutely, especially because the septal wall lies right below it, and they're both supplied by the same artery. So it is something I'm keeping in the back of my head that I'm probably going to get some anterior wall involvement here pretty shortly. But I'm only going to label this as septal. So now we want to figure out what coronary arteries affected. So lateral, we have our left circumflex. And this is really important because it's important to know where the blockage is so the cath lab can go in and fix it. Also for us, it's important because we know that, the whole, if it's, and here it's going to be the anterior descending, that's a pretty big artery to be blocked, and this patient's probably going to be a little more unstable. My inferior is my RCA, so go ahead and label that. And then my septal and anterior is going to be in my left anterior descending. So really important that I need to know that my LAD is where my problem is, because it's a really big artery to be blocked. So yeah, I'm expecting this patient that they're probably going to be unstable. So it's my LAD. All right, let's label this rhythm. So I'm going to look at my lead 2. I have a nice P wave, nice narrow QRS, T wave. Everything about it looks normal. So it's going to be sinus rhythm at 90 beats per minute with septal infarct. All right, going on to the next example. Draw our chart. All right, I'm going to go through lead by lead. Lead 1, definitely have some elevation there. There's my J point way above that isoelectric line. Lead 2, there's my J point there. Doesn't look like any elevation. Lead 3, there's where my QRS ends. Got some depression there. We don't use AVR for diagnostics. We do want to see that P wave is inverted though, which it looks like it is. My AVL, definitely got some elevation there. AVF, nope, maybe, oops, that was supposed to be an X. Maybe a little bit of depression, but definitely no elevation. V1, definitely no elevation there. V2, however, definitely have some elevation there. So there's my isoelectric line, and it's above. V3, some pretty big elevation, same with V4, and V5, and V6. So a lot of elevation going along here. Let's count my rate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So since that one's cut off, I'm not going to count it. So I'm just going to go with 11. 11 times 6 gives me a heart rate of 66 beats per minute. Leads elevated. We're just going to write down all the ones I circled. So we have lead 1, AVL, V2, V3, V4, V5, and V6. So a lot of elevation going along here. Let's go ahead and label which walls these represent. So I got my lateral wall. I have my inferior. My septal, and my anterior. All right, so lateral wall, I need at least 2 contiguous leads. Well, I have 1 AVL, V5, and V6 affected, so definitely have lateral wall involvement. All 4 are affected. All right, looking at some of my other ones, my septal wall, well, we know inferior is not affected, but let's go to septal. I've got 1 out of 2 affected. So I didn't have any elevation in V1, but I had it in V2, so we're not going to count it, right? Because it has to be at least 2 contiguous leads. How about anterior? Definitely have elevation in 3 and 4, which gives me those 2 contiguous leads, sorry. So I have my lateral and anterior wall affected. Let's go ahead and label our arteries now. So lateral, we have the LCX. My inferior is my right coronary artery. My RCA. My septal and anterior is going to be my left anterior descending. So if I have both lateral and anterior wall involvement, this is going to be my LAD and my LCX. So when thinking about how my patient's going to be presenting, that whole left coronary artery system is being blocked somehow. My left ventricle is probably not going to work very well. I mean, this could end up being really bad for my patient. So definitely going to consider this patient, could, if they're stable, they could go unstable very quickly. Let's go ahead and label this. So looking at lead 2, there's my P wave. Got a QRS, even though it's low voltage, still there. Normal T wave, so it is a sinus rhythm. And for this one, it's an anterior lateral, so we can put that together. Those two walls often go together. Now you can just write out anterior and lateral STEMI. That's fine too. Or you can write anterior lateral. All right, going on to the next one. Definitely see some elevation right off the bat here. Draw my chart. All right, so I definitely have elevation in lead 1, none in lead 2, none in lead 3. I got a lot of depression in lead 3. We don't look at AVR. Have some elevation going on here in AVL. No elevation in AVF. None in V1. Definitely have some elevation in V2, right? Those are definitely tombstones. My J point's way up here. V3, even higher, really, really bad. V4, really high on my J point. Have elevation in V5 and a little bit in V6. We'll just put a question mark there. My rate, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 times 6 gives us 60 beats per minute. Leads elevated, it's all the ones we circled. I got 1, AVL, V2, V3, V4, V5, and then we thought maybe V6, something to note. It is, to me, it does look elevated there, so I'm going to count it. Now we need to figure out what walls are affected. So this is my lateral leads right here. Then I have my inferior wall leads. Got my septal wall leads, and I have my anterior wall leads. So what walls are affected? Well, we definitely have lateral. All 4 of the lateral leads are affected. Septal, only one of our septal leads are affected, so we're not going to quite put that in the name yet. I definitely think that it's beginning to be affected, and this patient's probably incredibly unstable, just given looking at how bad this elevation is. But my anterior, I have both leads. So kind of looks like the one above, huh? So what coronary arteries are affected? Let's go ahead and label our coronary arteries. The lateral wall is fed by the left circumflex. The inferior wall is fed by the right coronary artery. Septal and anterior are both fed by the left anterior descending. So what arteries are affected? We have lateral and anterior. So my lateral is my LCX. My anterior is my LAD. Let's go ahead and label this guy. It's going to be anterior lateral again. In our underlying rhythm, looking at lead 2, I got a nice P wave, good QRS, and a T wave. It's going to be sinus rhythm, 60 beats per minute, with another anterior lateral. STEMI. right, next example. Draw our chart. All right, lead 1 looks incredibly normal, right? I don't have any thing off the isoelectric line there. Lead 2 though, definitely my J point's definitely up there, so that's going to be elevated. Let me erase that because we're going to look at that later. Lead 3, have some ST elevation. We don't look at AVR for diagnostics. In AVL, looks like I have some depression, so no elevation. AVF, definitely have some elevation there. V1, have depression. V2 looks like I have depression. Same with V3. V4, it's borderline, right? But honestly, because I don't have it in its contiguous lead in V3, doesn't matter. And then V5 does look like I have some elevation here. There's my isoelectric line. There's my J point. And same with V6. To figure out a rate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 times 6 to get my rate equals 72. My lead's elevated. I have 2, 3, and AVF. I also have V5 and V6. So let's go ahead and label our walls that go with each one of these. This is going to be lateral, inferior, this is going to be lateral. We'll just go ahead and label all the lateral ones right now. AVF is going to be inferior. V1, V2 is my septal. And V3 and V4 anterior. So what walls are affected? Well, we have our inferior with 2, 3, and AVF. And then we also have our lateral with V5 and V6. Let's go ahead and label our arteries. So lateral is our left circumflex. Our inferiors are RCA. Right coronary artery, and then our septal and our anterior are our left anterior descending, or LAD. So what arteries are affected on this one? Well, we have our LCX over here, and we have our right coronary artery represented by the inferior. Let's go ahead and label this rhythm. So here, when I look at my P wave, it's right here. I highlight it in green. It is upright, but my PR interval is definitely over 5 blocks long. So this is actually a 1st degree heart block. So I got to sinus rhythm at 72 beats per minute with a 1st degree heart block and inferior, or we can call it inferiolateral. You can just write inferior and lateral STEMI. So on this patient, I would definitely want to get a right-sided 12 lead. So I'm going to take V4, I'm going to move it over to the other side, or I could take all of my chest leads and flip them. But it's easier just to move V4, do a right-sided 12 lead, and we're looking for that right ventricular involvement. My patient will definitely be more unstable with that right ventricular involvement. All right, going on to the next one. Let's go ahead and make our chart. I definitely see some elevation going on in here. This is a very, very sick patient. Oh, can't even. We're just going to draw through those. All right, so lead 1, my J point's up here. Definitely have some elevation going on. Lead 2, no, definitely no elevation. Here's my J point. Lead 3, looks like I have depression, so no elevation. AVL, definitely have elevation. There's my J point way up there. AVF, nope. V1, elevation for sure. V2, well, not hard to tell that. It's definitely some elevation. Same with V3, V4, V5, and V6. It's all very, very pronounced elevation. So those are definitely tombstones. I would expect to see a 12 lead like this, probably a patient's post-arrest, or they're definitely on the road to arresting. So that's just because of how high that elevation is just the more cardiac muscle death that we have. Let's figure out a rate. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 again. 6 times 12 gives us a rate of 72 beats per minute. When we look at leads affected, we already got them. So I got my lead 1, AVL, V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, 6. So I'm just going to rate V1 through V6. Walls affected. Well, let's write out our walls. I'm just going to put the first letter of each one. So this is our lateral wall. Inferior, inferior, inferior. This one's lateral. Septal, septal, anterior, anterior, and the last two are lateral. So my walls affected are pretty much every wall except for my inferior. So I have lateral, septal, and anterior. Now I want to figure out the arteries affected. For my lateral wall, it's the LCX. For my inferior, it's RCA. And for my septal and anterior, it's the left anterior descending, or the LAD. So in this case, I have both my LAD and my LCX involved. So what could be happening here is, remember, so this is my heart. I got my right coronary artery over on this side, kind of loops around the back. Then I have my left coronary artery, and it branches right here, branches off into two sections, to my left anterior descending, then my left circumflex, and that curls around the back. So since I have the LAD and the LCX involved, I could potentially have a clot up here that's blocking off both of them in my left main coronary artery, or I could have two separate blockages going on each side. But either way, I know that the whole left side of my heart's pretty much taken out, so I know that this is going to be a pretty critical patient. So let's figure out what our rhythm is. Surprisingly, they're in a pretty good rhythm. We got a nice P wave, narrow QRS, pure interval looks normal, so it is sinus. Then we have a lateral, septal, and anterior wall MI. And I added that, I put anterior, lateral, septal, STEMI. You could put anterior, septal, lateral, STEMI, or you could just write anterior, lateral, and septal, STEMI. All right, looking at this next one, I do see something different. I got right here, I just want to point that out, V4R. So this is a right-sided 12 lead when we're looking at it. We're going to keep that in mind when we name it. Let's go ahead and draw my chart. All right, so going through my leads, in lead 1, I have depression there, so we're just going to go ahead and cross that one out, no elevation. V2, I do have some elevation here. Looks like I have some ST elevation. Erase that, because we're going to look at that for our underlying rhythm. Lead 3, definitely have some elevation. We don't look at AVR. AVL, I have depression, so no elevation. AVF, have elevation. V1 looks fine. V2, got some inverted T waves. V3 looks normal. V4R, I have some elevation here. V5 looks fine, and V6 looks fine. So let's go ahead and figure out our rate. So my rate I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I got 66 beats per minute. Looking at my leads elevated, I have 2, 3, AVF, and I also have V4R. And make sure you label it R, because remember that's telling me that they took that V4 and moved it over to the right side, and they're doing a right side at 12 lead. Let's go ahead and label our walls. So here's our lateral, here's our inferior, our septal, and our anterior. So my walls affected, I have inferior, and then I have that V4R. So it's not looking at the anterior wall here because we moved that lead, so it's not normal. This is actually looking at the right ventricle. So I'm just going to note that. And this is actually involved with the RCA, so we're not going to label that as far as arteries because we moved that lead, remember. So let me go ahead and put my arteries in here. My lateral is my LCX. My inferior is my RCA. And then my septal and anterior is going to be my LAD. I'm not going to label it because remember we moved that one, so I'm just going to leave that one blank. So my artery is affected. It's going to be my right coronary artery. All right, so let's label this rhythm, and this one's a little bit more tricky. I'm going to erase some stuff around lead 2 so we can see it better. All right, so lead 2, let's see what I have going on here. Well, this looks like a P wave, but our QRS got cut off, so I can't really see what's going on here. But here's a P wave. Here's my PR interval. Second P wave, PR interval. Third P wave, PR interval. Then we're moving into another lead, but my PR interval is actually getting longer. So I think it's actually easiest to see up here in lead 1, even though we don't typically look at lead 1 for rhythm identification. We can see that PR interval getting longer. And it's hard to see whole rhythms on these 12 leads, but we can even see it down here. Continues a little bit better. So this is actually a Winky-Bach. It just has a pretty long progression. You can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 progression of longer, longer, longer before we drop a beat. So this rhythm is going to be second degree type 1, a Winky-Bach, at 66 beats per minute with inferior STEMI. And I should note that my right ventricle is involved. Something to pay attention to because now I have biventricular failure. My right ventricle is not going to be able to pump blood into the left side of my heart, and it's going to just really knock a lot of things out. Probably one of the reasons too I'm having a heart block is because, you know, I'm starting to affect that SA node, which is supplied by the right side of the heart. So we're going to start seeing some rhythm disturbances here, and these patients typically present hypotensive, maybe bradycardic. They're not quite bradycardic yet, so we're not going to treat them with the bradycardia algorithm until they do become bradycardic, but definitely probably going to be hypotensive, so we're really not going to want to give this patient any nitroglycerin. So probably a very, very sick patient right there. All right, talking about sick patients, whew, I can already look at this one and tell that that is really slow. Move that up a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and draw our chart. And this gets hard when it gets really slow because it only really gives us one complex to look at in each section of strip. All right, so looking at lead 1 here. Oh, I didn't mean to circle it because we don't have any elevation. Let me erase that. So lead 1, maybe even a little pressure, but no elevation, so I'm going to cross it out. Lead 2 definitely have some ST elevation, so I'll circle it. Lead 3, I'm going to circle that one because I have some elevation. We don't look at AVR. AVL, ooh, some huge depression, but not elevation. AVF, some huge elevation there. B1, my complex is over here, but I have depression. B2, some massive depression. B3, massive depression, and I would expect to see depression somewhere if I had elevation somewhere else. V4 depression, I'm going to cross it out because it's not elevation. Same with V5, and then V6 looks pretty normal. So let's figure out our rate. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not good. 4 times 6, that gives me a heart rate of only 24 beats per minute. My lead's elevated. Oh, I don't know why I crossed AVF. There's some huge elevation there, so that was a mistake. I got 2, 3, and AVF. Oh, and there goes my AVF, started moving again. All right, let's go ahead and label our walls. So here's my lateral, walls. Here's my inferior. My septal. And, oh, that wasn't septal. I just was on a roll there. That's going to be anterior. So my wall affected, got 2, 3 AVF, so it's going to be my inferior wall. Go ahead and label our arteries. It's going to be my left circumflex for my lateral. My inferior is going to be my right coronary artery. And then my septal and anterior is going to be my LAD. So coronary artery is affected. Since it's inferior, it's going to be my RCA. Now let's take a look at this underlying rhythm because it is interesting. So I'm going to erase a lot of this stuff here so we can get a good look at it. So we can look at it and tell like it's not good, right? Oh, some of the stuff isn't erasing. So I'm just going to look at this last line here and circle my P waves. I'm not sure if there's a P wave there. There might be. So I do have P waves for every QRS complex. There probably is one there. It's just probably really small and I can't see it. So I do have P waves, which means this is sinus, but wow, this is really slow. This is only about 24 beats per minute. Another thing that tells me it's sinus is my QRS is nice and narrow. So I'm not worried about it being ventricular. I would certainly almost expect it to be ventricular when it's this slow, but it's definitely sinus. So I have sinus Brady, 24 beats per minute with inferior wall STEMI. Now I'd imagine this patient is extremely unstable. I would expect them to be not compensating well. I mean, this patient probably need pacing because they're probably, I mean, I can't imagine anyone being stable at 24 beats per minute. Not saying it can't happen. Probably need pacing. Probably very, very, very sick. All right, this takes us to our last example. So we're going to draw our chart. Go through each lead. Lead 1 looks pretty normal. Lead 2 looks pretty normal, no elevation. I know it's a little blurry. Lead 3, no elevation. We don't look at R. AVL looks pretty normal. There's my J point. VF, I got some, looks like my patient moved here, so I'm going to look at the part that is normal and it looks normal. V1, definitely got some elevation here, right? V2, definitely some elevation. Same with V3, V4, V5, and V6. figure out my rate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Whew. So 18 times 6 gives me a heart rate of 108 beats per minute. My leads elevated, I have basically V1 through V6. Let's go ahead and label my walls. V lateral. And I have my inferior, my septal, and my anterior. Oops, that one moved. So what walls are affected? I have V1 through V6. So it is going to be my septal, my anterior, and my lateral, because I have at least 2 of my laterals, so that makes it 2 contiguous leads. So what arteries are affected? We have my lateral is going to be my LCX. My inferior is my right coronary artery. V1 and V2, also V3, V4, so my septal and anterior is going to be my LAD. So my coronary artery wall is affected. It's going to be, since it's septal, anterior, and lateral, it's going to be my LAD for these 2. And this one is going to be the LCX. All right, so let's go ahead and label this. So it looks like I can see it really well in lead 1, a narrow QRS complex, a normal P wave, a normal PR interval, so it is sinus, but it is going to be sinus tech, because I'm over 100 beats per minute. And this is going to be that big long, because I got 3 walls affected now, so I can write arteriolateral, septal, STEMI.